Welcome. I'm Lori Lee Binstock, host of a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. As we approach the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, I wanted to invite a former ATSTP guest, Matthew John Bocchi. Last year, he released the first memoir written by a surviving child of a 9/11 victim. This year, Sway, his book, is being re-released in paperback. Sway details the tragic event of Matt Bocchi losing his father during the 9/11 attacks, the manipulation and sexual abuse by an uncle, drug addiction, redemption, and sobriety. Matt joins us today to update us on his life a year later. Matt, thank you so much for coming on again.
You're welcome. Great to be back.
Well, since the release of Sway last year, I know a lot of things have happened.
Yep.
What is your latest endeavor?
Well, I had been working on other writing projects in the meantime. I really spent the last year speaking at schools, albeit most of it was virtual, but speaking at high schools and telling my story to kids and hoping to have some sort of impact on their lives. And I don't always gear the talk in a preventative way, but if they can avoid going down the road I went down by listening to my story, then that's also a plus. But that's been my main endeavor the last year.
Wow. So now that we're going in person, are you visiting schools?
I just started about a month ago. We had I got granted with one of the schools. They allowed me to come back in person. So that was strange at the same time. At that point in time, the mask mandate wasn't lifted. So I had to kind of go half mask at some points in order to allow the kids to see me and stuff and whatnot. But yeah, I think going forward, obviously now, the fall will be a much different story and ideally fully back to normal.
So when you are at these schools, what is your main focus? Is it on sobriety? Is it on abuse? Do you talk about your own story of sexual abuse?
I talk about everything. Oftentimes some of the schools will have certain topics that they want me to go maybe a little bit more detailed with. And honestly, for me, I don't plan much of what I'm going to say in terms of, okay, what I want to highlight more today. I know which stories maybe in terms of especially drug abuse, I'll go a little bit more detailed with, right? But that being said, yeah, the whole entire story is out there. My story is completely public. So I talk about everything. I have no shame in talking about anything that I went through. It just sometimes is a little unique in each presentation because sometimes kids have been affected by drug abuse, or sometimes kids have been affected by 9/11 in some obscure way, or sometimes they've questionably gone through something similar to what I went through with abuse or assault or something along those lines. And I think for me, it's just about being transparent and honest with them. And if they want to come up to me after and talk about something that they went through, that's why I do it. And that's why I'm there. And whatever, if they have something they want to get off their chest, sometimes they reach out to me personally via email, which is fine as well. And that to me is the reason why I do it. That's the reason why I get out there, and it's emotionally draining at times, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I get fulfillment out of doing it. It's my passion. It's something that I'm pursuing as my career. So that's the reason why I do it. And if one kid gets impacted by it, if one kid reaches out to me and says, hey, listen, I went through something similar, X, Y, and Z. Thank you for being honest, and thank you for telling your story, because it helped me. Then I did something right.
Right. And I assume can be really hard, especially, we talked about this before, being a man who has been sexually abused by a man. And, that's trauma that I feel like so many people aren't talking about. And I'm so proud of you for talking about it, because I think that's just giving more space for kids to say if something is happening to them, especially when you're going to schools and saying it.
Yeah, and it kind of brings me back a little bit to like the Me Too movement a little bit. And I kind of questioned myself. I'm like, should I have maybe posted something, or should I, because there was obviously a lot of it was empowering women to come forward about assault or abuse and whatnot, which is obviously amazing. But then I'm like, how many men have gone through something and they're just too scared? You know, I hate to say it, but it's in a strange way. It's almost as if women going through that or assault or something along those lines is like strangely accepted. You know, people take it for what it's worth. Like, okay, that's unfortunate,
Right.
but they're not looking at it sometimes in a more judgmental light that they would with a man. You know,
Right.
because there's just this societal belief that like men can't go through something like that, that men can't be vulnerable, they can't be emotional, they can't allow themselves to get honest and say, hey, I went through this, this is how it made me feel, um, and I'm scared, right? Because men showing or exhibiting fear in many people's eyes is a sign of defeat.
Right.
So that is why I'm trying to be vocal about this, you know, and it is a big part of my story. I mean, it certainly was a turning point in my life. And I think it really did set the tone for a lot of things that occurred in the next few years. Um, it certainly affected me as the years went on after too, you know, after the abuse was done, and then I was already in the midst of drug addiction. But um, it certainly played a role in a lot of things that I, you know, did.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I feel guilty that I haven't had enough men on my show. But I think it's mostly because men don't really reach out and say, I want to tell my story. The men who have reached out to me, they've gone through exactly what you've gone through. Just the shame of speaking up or saying something or telling someone that this is happening. And so they kind of lived with it for a really long time. And it just, when you live with something like this, it doesn't get better. It just gets worse until you actually say something. So again, I'm extremely proud of you for being so courageous and sharing the story, because you know what? I feel like I found a friend in you. It's like
Mhm.
we're in this really, really fucked up club of sex
Yeah,
abuse
yeah, yeah,
survivors,
yeah,
especially by family members.
yep.
Um, not long after you know, I actually reached out to you a couple times,
Hmm.
after our interview, because I do consider you as a friend. And
Hmm.
so, and we've gone through something similar. But for you, when your book was released, afterwards, after I spoke with you, your uncle, who was your perpetrator, was released from prison. With him out, like, what is the family dynamic? What are your feelings right now?
Well, first of all, he actually got out week and a half prior to Sway coming out.
Mm,
So he was out and about. Um, he was out and about, and yeah, I was a little scared. You know, I was scared. Um, I There was a lot of things that were going through my head, and I had to process my emotions maturely. You know, um, because there was part of me that, although yeah, I spoke up. He went to prison. I was like, yeah, maybe I should have just handled this differently, right? Maybe I should have just kept my mouth shut, or maybe I should have just kept it within the family, or maybe I should have done whatever. So him getting out, initially, it did grip me with some fear. Um, I was curious to see what was going to happen with my aunt, um, and I didn't know what he was going to do, because my fear was he's not going to do anything to me directly. But now that it's just a rational thing, it's just a rational belief, right? He'd
mm-hmm.
been away for 4 years, right? So it's like something was going to happen to me, probably would have happened already, uh, not after multiple parole hearings and this and that and the other thing. So, um, but anyway, I think it's pretty natural anyway to have that fear come back up. You know, it's all the emotions are being resurfaced, right? All of the shame is back. And that's the thing, right? I allowed myself to heal in those years a little bit better than I had in the years prior. Um, but even so, it was so new, so fresh, right? Like I didn't say anything to anyone for 10 plus years. It's a horrible secret to hold for 10 years.
Yeah.
And many people hold that secret for many, many longer years, right? But so the dynamic now, well, I thought the dynamic was going to change about 4 years ago when my grandfather passed away. It didn't. And so the dynamic now, I mean, it's slowly shifting towards possibly a positive direction or a positive place, but it's not there yet. You know, it's going to take a lot of time. And I don't want to go into too many details, but the relationships are torn, and the relationships between multiple family members, it's almost as if they're irreparable. I don't know if it's ever going to get better. You know, I think the problem is too, so much transpired in the 4 years that he was away. It's hard to erase that. You know,
Yeah.
it really is. And I think a lot of the people close to him, who perhaps I thought were going to react, well, made it seem as if they were going to act differently when he got out and acted in the way that I originally imagined, essentially supporting him and this, that, the other thing. That's what really took me by surprise. And that's what really affected me, because I felt, you know, in some ways I was kind of fed some lies in the last few years, like, oh, you know, we sympathize with you. We understand, like, this is, you know, he was so wrong and whatever. And then he gets out and it's like, well, let's throw him a party. He just got out of prison, you know? So
Wow.
it was really, really hard, you know, really, really hard. And so what I've done, well, I'm moving forward in my life. I cut those people out. There's no really reason to have them in my life. If he sees me walking down the street, runs me over with his car, it's, you know, what am I going to do? You know, a lot of this, I've come to believe in life anyway, so much of these things that we go through are out of our control anyway.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing I can do. I'm not going to live in this perpetual state of fear.
Right.
I'm not going to, you know, worry about him. So that's sort of, you know, where we're at now.
Yeah. I know that when I told you that, you know, I was abused by my father, and then when I told my mom that I actually went into treatment, that this is what happened, she was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to leave him. I'm going, you know, everything. I'm never going to speak to him again. And then, you know, kind of like 5 or 6 months later, nothing really changed, but I didn't know what was happening. She didn't talk about him or anything. So I knew she was still with him, but I didn't know um what their situation was. But it was in April around my birthday, they, you know, they sent me a card, and so I called my mom and I said, "Okay, thank you." And then she started shaming me for, you know, "Well, when are you gonna come visit us?" And I'm like, I'm really I have no plans to visit as long as dad's around." And she was just like, "Why can't you forgive and forget?" And I felt like that was like a blow to me, where it was like, "Okay, well, you know, you need to forgive," as if she was putting the pressure on me. Now it's your turn. You need to forgive and forget so we can just be a family again. Um, and, you know, it took me a really it was devastating for a while, but it took me a little bit, and I realized that for her, she just didn't know how to change, you know, and I think she didn't want that pressure on her to,
Mm,
um, you know, she kind of wanted to be off the hook. Like, if you forget this happens, then I'm okay, and then I can just live the same life that I was living in, you know, this ignorance that I was living in. And yeah,
yeah.
that was hard.
Well, I think too, like where our stories are similar is, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think that both of us tried to, in our minds, live life normally,
Hmm.
that people would be blown away and completely surprised, taken aback by the fact that when you came forward about it, like, wait, what? Because like you tried to live a normal life. But
Right.
that's what people don't understand, is what the victim goes through.
Exactly.
The victim doesn't want to come forward and say, hey, this happened to me, right? I look back at my 14-year-old self. I was literally talking to a kid from my high school yesterday. I'm talking to him about this, and he's like, I read your book 5 times, and telling me stuff that he's going through. And I told him how intimidated I was in high school by certain people, right? Like, I was a small kid. I had friends, but I was intimidated by people. And it was hard for me to trust people. Mm-hmm. The fact that I was going through that at that point in my life, if I had come forward about that, that's where the fear was driven. That's what it stemmed from, is that everyone was going to look at me in a different light, and I would never have been the same. And so I already had an abnormal adolescence. I already had an abnormal childhood. Coming forward about it at that point in my life probably would have ruined everything. Like, it would have ruined it even more than it already was ruined.
Yeah.
So I think people are so surprised by that because they just don't understand that the victim, it's easier for the victim at times, as much as it tears them apart in the inside, to live with that, to live with the shame and the guilt, and just pretend, it's okay. If you just pretend it didn't happen, it's okay. Right? So for me, it was easier to put on that facade that nothing happened. It was easier for me to put a smile on my face and talk to him buddy, and, try to shake off his inappropriate jokes at a family event, or, something along those lines. It was easier for me to just swallow it and just pretend it didn't happen. Let's fast forward to when I came forward about it. I mean, the first family event that I had, they were more like so surprised and trying to just understand it themselves. And that's what I think confused so many people. And that's probably what was the case for you in a lot of ways too, is that people don't understand. Like, they're like, wait, what? Like, how did you live your life like this? Like, how did you not say anything? Or how did you hang out with that person who did this to you? People sometimes can't comprehend that. Yeah. But guilt and shame and like despair are just powerful, powerful feelings.
Yeah, you really had to. And, your 14, 15, 16-year-old self, like you were saying, you were vulnerable then without dealing with the abuse and all of that. You're at a very critically developmental age where a trauma like that is really difficult. Like you were saying, like, at my wedding, I danced with my dad, my friends loved my dad. Everyone was shocked when I came out with that. But you're right. Like, I couldn't come out with it then. And to be honest, I don't think my mom would have believed me then, just to save her own ass.
Yeah, listen, I'm right there with you.
Right? Like,
no one would have believed me as in that state.
Yeah.
No one. And the other thing too is, like, I grappled with this for a while. And I'm at a point now in my life where I'm fully in tune and okay with how things have happened to me. But you watch like an episode of like Law and Order SVU, and like it's like all these kids are 6 years old, 7 years old, and I'm like, I was 14, right? I should have had the wherewithal to stop it, because deep down inside subconsciously that I knew where certain things were wrong, and I knew the answers. I knew the difference between right and wrong. But the problem is, when you're in a state of such vulnerability, right? You take that all aside, put all that to the side. This is the one thing my therapist was saying to me all the time. Do you allow a 14-year-old to vote? No. Do you allow a 14-year-old to go into a store and buy a pack of cigarettes? No. Do you allow a 14-year-old to go buy alcohol? No. Well, why? To drive a car, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You're in a fragile state at that age. You're in a developmental state at that age. And, the brain isn't fully developed yet. And a kid that young, it's so easy to manipulate.
Right.
And that's the thing. And you take all of that aside, right? Well, now let's add in all the other layers too, right? And like, that's why for me, it's like, listen, like, I was so afraid. I was like determined to think, okay, if I come forward about this in my book, I say all this stuff in my book, I'm imagining the army of kids from my high school that are ready to like make fun of me. Like, this is like the irrationality that comes with this, right? And so nothing happened like that. You know, I
Right.
had kids reaching out to me, guys reaching out to me, guys who I was like scared of, saying, "Hey man, I went through something like this. Hey, I
Wow.
went through this or I went through that," you know? Like that is the power of being vulnerable. That's the power of being honest, you know, because it allows people to relate with you on a whole nother level. And it allows people to say, hey, listen, if you're doing this, if you're showing me you have the strength and the courage to come forward, then I can do the same exact thing. You know,
Right.
doesn't matter what anyone else has to say. Doesn't matter if they want to judge. It doesn't matter. But if you have the ability to do it and be okay with yourself, then I can do it too. So, so that's a lot of growth too for me. You know, I mean, I
Yeah.
think that even when I first came forward about this, I mean, Jesus, I was like, I didn't want to say all the details. I didn't want to go into explicit detail about what happened, right? Because, as you mentioned, male, male, and I'm straight male, right? So everyone, that was another fear, right? Oh, well, first of all, no matter what I did or didn't do, it's like, oh, I want to be like, you know, they're going to label me, right?
Mhm.
And I have nothing, I'm not, you know, uh, I have nothing against that, but it's just, that was the fear. You go to an
Mhm.
all boys school. I don't know how like I don't know how like how transparent I should be, but it's like you go to an all boys school, right? Like this is how guys act when they're in that age. Like they're so
Mhm.
quick to be like fag, homo, right? You're
Mhm.
gay, right? They're so
Yeah.
quick to just want to point and like laugh and make fun. Like that's like what these not guys, but kids do that,
Kids. Yeah.
right? Kids do that because they just don't understand.
Yeah.
So um and you know there was plenty of people from my high school who were gay, right? They weren't bullied. That's the funny part. There was none of that. That's the way it
Mhm.
should be, though, right?
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, like, why is it such a toxic part of masculinity to do that,
Right.
right? For guys to be like saying those types of things to one another. You know what I mean? So anyway, that was like the fear of mine, right? That everyone was gonna label me and they're gonna say, like, you're gay and like you can't defend yourself because look what happened to you. You know
But
what I mean?
wasn't that also your perpetrator hammering
Exactly.
that into your head? That was
Exactly.
him manipulating you and telling you how wrong that is, and that this is
Yeah.
he put that fear in you. That's
He
what
put that fear into
manipulation.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what abusers do. They incite this fear that you probably were never even thinking of prior, and now you're
Never,
scared.
never even crossed my mind. Never even, it never, right? Never. And then it's like, that's that's just the heartbreaking aspect with a lot of these situations. You look at like, they are so calculated.
Mm.
It's unbelievable how calculated they are, right? The fact that he was able to use my dad's death the way he used it, that's one thing, right? That's a whole nother level of disgust.
Mhm.
But the fact he was able to do that, okay, so that's how he knocks the wall down. He gets the wall down, he gets what he wants. And now how does he protect himself? Right? I mean, he got me out of talking X, Y, and Z. Anyone close to me that he knew I would have gone to, he got me not. He had a way that he knew he would say the right thing about that person to me that would prevent me from going to them.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Mhm.
and then, you know, it's unbelievable though to me how calculated they are. And that's why they're predators, you know,
Yeah.
that's why they're predators, you know?
Right. It's
So,
it's it's really hard when you think of it, like all the different people who in your life you could have gone to, but it's that predator, that abuser who, that absolutely happened to me. Like, this is what's going to happen if you tell. It is hard. I would get frustrated before I even told my story, when like Bill Cosby, all this, all of these
yeah.
perpetrators, these victims were coming out 20 years later. I remember some people being like, I don't believe that because they would have told earlier. And I would tell them, no, that's absolutely not true. I never told my story, but I felt like that also kept me from saying anything because it's like, oh, wow, I won't be believed if I say this because it's been, 10 years or so.
Hmm.
And that's why it took me over 20 years to say something.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, look, I'm sure you have that dichotomy of people who, there's a difference, right? You have people who go through like something like that, like this, and they want to use it to their advantage to get money or whatever. Like and to me, there should be a certain degree of compensation for a lot of this stuff, because I mean, like, this damages a person, right?
yeah.
And granted, for me, like, I didn't hit the jackpot in my situation, with my perpetrator, and that's not something I was looking for anyway. But there is that difference, right? And that's where I think
Mhm.
that, unfortunately, it's a tainted situation with that, because you
Yeah.
got people who are going to judge, right? You got people who are going to say, why'd you wait this many years, right? Or why are you doing it now? What, you want money? What is it? Like, they feel like you have to have a motive. You don't have to have a motive, right?
No.
I don't know if I ever would have come forward. I was at this turning point in my life. I was at this crossroad. I don't know if I would have come forward had I gotten off the phone with my brother that day and said, okay, I'm not going to say anything to anyone. But instead, I went into a different mindset and action mode, and I did do something about it. Now, I don't know if I never got sober, would any of this had come to light? I don't know. I really don't know. Um, but the unfortunate thing is, people think that just because time goes by, right? Sometimes you need to have the experiences of life, in my opinion, at
You to
least, in
grow.
order to grow. Exactly. In order to grow, process it more, and then be like, okay, now I have the power and the strength to come forward about this, right?
Hmm.
Um, and then you look at the inverse side of that, right? Why are some people, they don't want to come forward ever? They'd
No.
rather go to the grave with this, you know?
Yep.
And maybe it doesn't eat them in the same way it would eat at you and me, but it eats at them at some part, you know?
Yeah. I
And
mean,
I
I
know
didn't
that.
know. Yeah, like, I didn't know that all of the different behavioral issues that I had were PTSD. I had no clue. I was just
Yeah.
like, "Oh, this is just who I am." And, even when, the podcast came out and, I had a cousin come to me and say, "You know what? I was being abused by my dad, who is related to my father."
Oh, dear Lord.
And
Yeah, I think you did tell me that,
yeah,
actually.
I did tell you that. And I do remember, like, when I told my mom, she was just like, "Well, you know what kind of person she is." I was like, that was PTSD. Like, at that point, I was like, "You still don't understand what's happening to me, because you would have considered me a bad kid, doing, abusing drugs and doing this and doing that. And that would have been an issue." If I was not at this place in my life where things were somewhat stable, I had a family, like I mentioned, I don't think my mom would have believed me. She would have said, "Well, you're a liar because you lied about the drug use, or whatever." She doesn't connect the fact that those are symptoms of PTSD that changed me. Was that a fear for you? I
Yeah.
mean, I
Well,
know that you were sober at that point, correct?
yeah. Well, it was a fear that was brought to life for me, because yes, I was sober at that point. I was sober about 7 months, if like 6, 7, yeah, 7 months. Wow. At that point in time, now I had been on probation already. I was on probation in the state of New Jersey, but if I messed up, and that wasn't the reason why I mean, it wasn't like keeping me sober by any means. It never does keep anyone sober.
Mhm.
If I messed up, I was going to go to jail. So I had legal trouble and jail time over my head. Um, but that's exactly what he did. He when he got arrested the first time, he got arrested twice, because the first time when I came forward and I met with the local police, I was with the FBI as well. They asked me to give irrefutable evidence as to why I knew I was a certain age. I couldn't give it. My
Mhm.
brain was like an overdrive. Like, I had never talked about this with anyone. There was a possibility that I talked about it with one of my friends when I was under the influence, another kid who was struggling. I don't remember that conversation. He claims I said something to him, but I don't remember the conversation. regardless, obviously nothing happened because it was years ago. It was years prior. But this was the first time I'm telling my entire family. I'm telling strangers. I'm telling the police. Like it was a lot to deal with. I'm like sitting there, like feeling like a little kid. I'm like, I can't give you what you want. I can't. I don't know what to say. And they're like, well, you have to tell us like what happened. And like, I didn't know what to do, like how to go about it. Right. So anyway, the first time they arrested him, they charged him with second degree. And that's exactly what he was doing. He was saying, oh, he's doing this to get off for drug charges. Da, 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 da. I'm like, listen, I don't really know in what world you live in where someone gets arrested for drug charges and then they make up that their uncle's a pedophile. You know, It doesn't really like, it doesn't go hand in hand. So that was another thing, even leading up to me getting sober to begin, like that I kind of struggled with as well. I knew in the midst of addiction, I was like, if I come forward about this, no one's going to believe me. I mean, I'm in and out of treatment centers the last 3 years. No one's going to believe me. And honestly, it wasn't something that I was trying to, I wasn't ready at that point. Wasn't ready at that point. So anyway, but my fears were brought to life when I did come forward, and that's, like you said, like, that's what he did, Yeah. That's exactly what he did.
Yeah, I feel like people need to understand that the PTSD symptoms, it creates more trauma that other people can use against you when you are trying to tell your truth, tell your story.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Well, how has recovery been for you?
In terms of sobriety or in terms of?
Well, let's focus on sobriety right now. Like, how has sobriety been for you in the last year?
Well, I mean, it's been, there was obviously the initial, I don't want to say struggle, but it was a difficult time in the beginning of the pandemic because obviously meetings then all went to Zoom. And so it was an adjustment for sure. I think strangely, I did get used to Zoom now that the fact that everything's going back to in person. The convenience factor was really nice. I think that a lot of people resonated with that. But recovery is good. I mean, like, there was a lot of things, and this is something that I am so proud that I established in year one. My first year of sobriety, ironically enough, in the beginning, when I was in the sober house in the beginning, I was hitting about 6 meetings a week. When I was approaching a year of sobriety, I stopped going to as many meetings because I was in this like weird state of, if you even want to call it like adopted Buddhism or something. I just wanted to have a spiritual connection with the higher power.
Yeah.
And so I was in the firm belief that if I had a constant contact with the higher power, a good connection spiritually, was in touch with my feelings, in touch with my mind and my body, and they were in sync, meditation and prayer, that was dominant in my life.
Yeah.
So at that point in my life, in that time, I was doing maybe 1 meeting a week, 2 meetings a week, speaking at meetings, and things like that. When I moved back home to Jersey, that changed. So I started going to more meetings, right? But the fact is, I knew I needed to have everything else that I just mentioned. I needed to have that connection with the higher power. Because listen, there's going to be times you can't get to a meeting. Even aside from the fact, if this pandemic didn't happen and everything was on Zoom, there were times where you can't get to a meeting. What are you going to do?
Right.
You got to pick up the phone and call someone. You got to be able to have that connection with your higher power and be able to work through it sometimes on your own. Right. So for me, I have like a lot of readings that I do in the morning. They'll set the tone for the day for me. And I'll have 6 years. I'll have just celebrated 6 years sobriety.
Wow. Congrats.
So yeah, I mean, it's crazy, man. It really is crazy. I mean, even like this last year has been actually in a lot of ways rewarding for me. I have to really, oddly enough, the pandemic has helped me in a lot of regards too. I had the ability to, I got off the antidepressant, I got to points in my life with the help of other people, with the help of, God of my understanding, which is in my case, I use my dad as my higher power. I've gotten to a point where I'm like, I'm ready. Like, I don't need not that I needed it to begin with, but I was ready to move forward and embrace my life, to
Hmm.
feel everything. Not to say that I was masked by any means, but I think that's part of it's part of our nature as a society at times. You get sober, here's antidepressants, here's this, here's that, feel
Right.
better, right?
Hmm.
And even in general, you're feeling a little bit down. Okay, here's Zoloft, here's Prozac, right? And to a leveling degree, people need medications like that. There's no doubt in my mind.
Right.
But I don't know if I ever really needed it. I wonder, now, because I've been dealing with some other stuff, some health stuff and whatnot. Everything's fine, but getting everything figured out in my life, and I'm like, wow, like I'm not as anxious of a person. I don't really have depression. Like my obsessive compulsive stuff is kind of diminishing slowly, and there's just a lot of things that I'm like starting to wonder, and the fact that I don't need to be on an antidepressant has been really powerful for me. It's
Hmm.
nice to be able to feel everything and not always have to pinpoint. Okay, well, I'm feeling this, so it's got to be this.
Right. Yeah,
Sometimes you
I
can just
mean,
feel things.
exactly. Or you could just be triggered by certain things. Like I can imagine, like, for me, when anyone mentions my dad, I get triggered and it gives me a lot of anxiety. For me, I was able to get off medication. I did a few psychedelic sessions where I was able to go in and really think about like how I grew as a person, this post traumatic growth that I've experienced, and I think that has helped me through all of this.
And there is just I think at times unmeasurable degree of strength that comes with some of that stuff, right? Like I don't know, you kind of just get like a new perspective on it too,
Mhm.
which is kind of nice, right? Like I don't know, I'm happy that I'm able to wake up this morning, right? Like there was like times where like I was so clouded, didn't really realize that what was causing that feeling, what was causing my brain to feel that way. And it's like, oh my God, like almost to a degree, I'm like, was I poisoning myself for all these years? Like, Jesus, like,
Yeah.
to have some sort of clarity, this new clarity is just something it's like I've been reborn again.
Yeah. Yeah.
I already was reborn when sobriety, and I'm like, again, I'm reborn, you know,
Yeah. Wow.
which is
That's
awesome. It's
yeah.
great.
And it's amazing. I feel like you've done so much growth in just a year that I've known you. And I
Yeah.
think it's just incredible to see, and I'm so grateful that you are willing to come back on,
Oh,
so we
of
can
course.
discuss that. What do you have planned for the 20th anniversary of 9/11?
Well, we're gonna have to see where things go with the paperback, right? I mean, I'm sure as time is getting closer. I mean, listen, last year with COVID, the memorial that we go to is a very small one anyway, but it was canceled. The memorial was canceled, so I believe everything is back to where it should be this year, and there is a really strong possibility that I don't know if on 9/11, definitely not in the morning. I'll do everything in my power not to do that in the morning, but in the later afternoon, potentially may do like a signing at the memorial.
Oh,
The
wow.
My book is going to be in the bookstore there in the gift shop, so there may be some stuff going on there. Last year was the first time I think, honestly, in my entire life post losing my dad, that I didn't spend the entire day mourning him.
Mm.
What I did instead was live my life. And that was something that was so fulfilling to me and empowering to me. Like every year we go to this memorial, and after the memorial, we go to breakfast. We go to this little diner. And it's always fluctuated for me, right? In the years, some years I'm sad, some years I'm okay, and mainly referring to sobriety because, pre-sobriety, like I would be either really messed up and not feel anything, or somewhat high and feel something, like, you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
now obviously I feel everything, but there were still times like where I was struggling. I would still kind of be interested in looking at the videos and the pictures. And last year, my dad's family came over, I had like 3 big interviews that day. So like, and everything was on Zoom. So I had to be going in and out for like the interviews. But my dad's family was at my house. We spent the day also, just talking about my book and like the things that I'm doing now. And like, just, there was a more positive, there was a newfound life that was born that day. It was like, we remember my dad for the good. We remember my dad for the life he lived, not the way he died. Right. And we spent that day happy. And that was just something that you can't, at times, you just can't put words on it. It just, the feeling that I had that day was just immense gratitude. And I just like would think of my dad and like smile, it's like, well, it's just like, that's the way it should be.
Right.
It's the way
you celebrated his life.
Celebrated his life. There you go.
Yeah. I love that.
So I think that a lot of that will be similar this year too.
You had to go through that mourning process. You had to go through all of, the bad stuff to get to this side. And I think you're there, and I love it. Again, thank you so much for joining me today.
No, thank you. And it's always a pleasure. And you said this before, but I would certainly emulate the same feelings. You're a friend of mine, and it's just so funny, like the change and the growth that both of us have had in this last year. I was thinking like, first time we got connected, and like I remember exactly where I was, and I recorded the first episode, and you were literally the first interview that I had. Literally the first interview that I had, not just podcast, the first interview I had was you. And and just talking about everything, it was just been really awesome.
Yeah, I remember the first time I actually just talked to you before that initial interview. I was driving the hour from Miami to where my treatment center was. And I remember I couldn't get off the phone with you. We just kept talking.
And then we kept doing that before, I think it was like even before we recorded, we hopped on the phone a few times.
Yeah.
And talked about things. And like, that was just nice because you understood, and you do understand. You do understand.
Yeah, you do too. We've been through, like I said, we're in this club.
Yeah, exactly.
But I love
it. Fucked up club, but we're in it.
Right. Exactly. I'm so glad that but we're thriving, and I think that's the important part. So
yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
That was Matthew John Bocchi, author of Sway. To learn more about Matt, please visit my website at ATSTpodcast.com. That's the letter A, ATSTpodcast.com. There you can find the link to purchase his book, now available in paperback. And you can also listen to my season 1 interview with Matt. Also, my social media platforms are at the top of my homepage. And don't forget to subscribe to my email list to get Authentic Insider magazine in your inbox monthly. Next week, you will hear from author of Rise from the Ashes, stories of trauma, resilience, and growth from the children of 9/11. That will be Peyton Lynch. Thank you for listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. I'm Lori Lee Benstock. Thank you for being a part of the conversation. Take care.